Hello, my name is Dr. David Palmiter. I'm a practicing clinical psychologist and psychology professor. I've created this YouTube channel for parents and couples to help them to promote happiness, wellness, and resilience in their family lives. In this edition, I'd like to discuss parenting through the COVID-19 crisis. I'd like to offer 3 qualifications, 3 guidelines, and address 3 questions that I'm hearing commonly in my practice and in interviews with the media. The first qualification is that most kids who are exposed to trauma do not develop a mental health problem afterwards. This is surprising to many people, but it's statistically the case. Yes, kids exposed to a trauma are at increased risk for developing a mental health problem, but still most do not develop one. And in the case of the COVID-19 in particular, kids may or may not be experiencing this as a traumatic event. The second qualifier is to point out what to me is an obvious thing, and that is that you, as an engaged parent, number among the world's leading experts on your child. Therefore, any suggestions, advice, counsel from mental health professionals needs to be siphoned through the lens of your expertise and adapted accordingly. Third, if kids are symptomatic, if they're having any problems with their regulation, sleep, appetite, activity, their social life, their academic life, their relationships with parents or their extracurricular life, if they've regressed significantly in any of those areas, some of the advice I'm going to offer in this video will not fit for them. And you will likely need the services of a qualified child psychologist or mental health professional. So on to my 3 guidelines. The first is to let your kids know, children, teenagers, that you're available for discussion, but don't force it. Like adults, sometimes kids deal with things by not thinking about them, by trying to push them out of their head for periods of time. And it's important that we as parents be respectful of that. I let them know that the door is there for them to walk through, and I'll let them know repeatedly and maybe even share some of my own thoughts, but I don't force. Secondly, I try to make it easier for my kids to communicate with me. The first way I do that is by offering empathy. And this feels not like the thing to do when you're an engaged parent. If my kid starts to open up about something that they're troubled about, the knee-jerk reaction is to offer a reassurance, to either tell them that they haven't thought this thing through accurately, or to offer some piece of information and perspective that suggests they don't have anything to worry about. And that immediate reassurance has a way of tamping down the kid's expression. So it's very important to stay in a place of empathy until my kid is finished. And this will feel grueling to do. If you're a parent lunatic like me, we love our kids so much it makes us crazy. Everything in your being is going to want to jump forward and offer reassurance, but suppress that. Offer empathy and stay in that place until your kid is finished. Not offering empathy is like painting over rust. I mean, it may look good, but it's just not going to take. The second way I can make things easier is by the context I create. For instance, sometimes kids and teenagers have an easier time talking with us about such things when they're not making eye contact. So maybe we go on a drive, or maybe as you know, before the movie is queuing up to watch on TV, we're having a discussion. Sitting on the kid's bed at night sometimes is another place where kids seem to be more open to sharing what they're thinking and feeling, especially those difficult thoughts and feelings. The third guideline is something I call selective truth-telling. A lot of folks wonder, well, what do I say to my kids about our safety? And the first thing is I want to determine what's rational in my own mind, to get clear in my own head about what rationally the risks are and are not. And then to engage a principle called selective truth-telling. The younger the child and the more the child may be showing mental health problems, the less I may share. No matter what I share, it's important that it be authentic and true. I don't want to damage my credibility by offering things that I don't believe are true and they're not authentic. That will have longer term risk longer term challenges to my credibility with my child, and that's too important of a thing to risk. So I would only say things that I really truly believe, but I might be very selective in what I share if my child is younger or has mental health vulnerabilities. If they're older and are doing pretty well overall, I'm more likely to be transparent with a wide array of what I'm thinking and feeling. But again, only if after I've gotten their take and provided empathy for it. So, 3 common questions I'm getting. Folks have asked, what's the most important thing that parents can do for their children through this crisis? It's kind of, I think if a physical wellness expert was asked, what's the most important thing you can do, they would offer an answer, but they'd be thinking of all the other things that are also important to do. And that's what this question is like. But I do want to answer it as asked. And when I'm asked that question, I'll say to promote parental wellness is the most important thing. It's kind of like when you're traveling on a plane, the instruction they give, should the oxygen mask drop, put the mask on yourself first before your child. And that is so important to do. What good am I to my children if I'm woozy and passing out and not balanced? I actually may say and do things that I later regret and which make my child's adjustment more tricky. Parenting from the cross is just not very effective. So I want to promote my own wellness as much as I can. The second question that I commonly get is, how can we set up our home life in a way that's adaptive if we're all there together, either by, because we've self-quarantined or because schools are closed or whatever. The first thing I would do is maintain as many of the rituals that you previously had as you can, to maintain adaptive rituals. The research tells us, as well as my clinical experience, that rituals are like islands of stability in the torrential currents of our culture. Kids may be shooting kids in school, but we still go to synagogue on the weekend. Planes may be crashing into buildings, but we still have pizza night. These rituals say to kids that their basic assumptions about their safety and security remain intact. So it's very important to promote them. A lot of times when parents divorce, they ask, well, what can we do to promote our kids' adjustment? And one of the 2 things is to keep as many things the same as is possible. The second is, how well the parents get along. But we see over and over again in the scientific literature how important rituals are to maintain, if you can, if they're practical and safe. The second thing is our own attitudes about this. How do we think about this? Do we see this as some apocalyptic retreat, or do we see it as a welcome staycation, a unique, one-of-a-lifetime opportunity to engage each other in a way we typically don't? If it's the former, we may have anxiety laced through everything that we do. If it's the latter, there'll be much more joy and getting the most out of the meaning that's there before us. It's remarkable. If you just Google search staycation activities, you'll get more things that you could possibly do. Maybe you form a campground in a family TV room. Maybe you have a cupcake baking contest. Maybe you play balloon baseball. Maybe you go through old family videos. I did that there's 5 of us now self-quarantined in my home. And we just last night watched a bunch of old videos and create such a feeling of bonding. Anyway, there's so many ideas out there that are available. And remember that being self-quarantined isn't the same thing as being a shut-in. Depending upon your geographical area, there may be multiple ways you can be outside, be physically active without risking picking up something or giving somebody else something. The third question I get is, how do we manage the ongoing stress? And there's a number of things to keep in mind. First is that the tripod upon which all wellness is built is sleep, appetite, and physical activity. So I want to try to keep those as sound as I can, following recommendations that you can easily find out there. For most kids, 8.5 to 9.5 hours sleep. There are some exceptions depending on age. To eat a sort of a balanced diet. That information is easily Googled through government websites. and to get an hour a day of physical activity, which means during that hour, my level of activity is such that it would be difficult to have a conversation with another person. Another one is to think about the formula. A crisis is like a dragon guarding treasure, right? It's commonly said crisis equals pain plus opportunity, but I like to, and that's true, but I like to think of it as a dragon guarding treasure. And sometimes the dragon's clawing is so terrible, it breaks people permanently, granted. So if you're watching this and a loved one has died or a loved one is close to death, this doesn't apply for the time being, because that's just too terrible of a thing. But for those who aren't facing a permanent thing like death, the dragon finishes its clawing and then it flies away, and the treasure is there to be enjoyed if we know to look for it, if we realize that it is there. For instance, thinking of this as a welcome staycation. I think that when people are resilient, and the research backs me up on this, is they're able to find the meaning that follows after all crises, or that imbue within all crises. And the dosing of treasure is at least equal to the dosing of pain. In other videos, I may give you some exercises that can help to make this point more real for you. For now, I think a resilient family 15 years from now, looking back on 2020, will say things like, hey guys, remember that time in 2020 when we, right, that activity. And then the other thing to do with managing stress going forward is to try to keep the dosing of news. I don't see really a need to do it more than once a day, if that, maybe once every other day. Everybody's got a different capacity for handling that, but I would try to keep the dosing of news limited to what works for us as a family or as individuals. And also, every 2 or 3 days, do a search for good news COVID-19, because there are some developing good news stories that are there to be enjoyed. Finally, in terms of ongoing stress, keep that principle in mind of selective truth-telling and the boundaries that you may need to apply for kids who are younger or who are showing mental health problems. And remember, in the latter case, it's always good to get a good child psychologist or child mental health professional on board. These things are usually easier to treat earlier on than they are later on. And there's a lot of science available for practitioners to use to promote the wellness of children. In the description for this video, I will also include a referral link for you. So that's it for this edition. Please remember, we are made for love.